Girls.
Boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, young and old, middle and young, whatever you want to call it, all the ages, all the spectrum of life, organisms, species, whatever you want to call us, they, them, you, it, us, we, just as long as it's not all about me and all about I. But once again at Weirman Media Studios, we are live here today. We are going to be doing an episode on how love. We just did an episode on love, and now we're going to be doing an episode. We got really deep in that episode. We do on a lot of episodes. It's deep diving topics. That's a big deal. Is deep diving them and then going through them and analyzing them and looking at them through ambiguities, looking at them from different people's perspectives and interpretations, and looking at the inexactness of people's perceptions of things, people's perceptions of realities, people's perceptions of ideas, people's perceptions of definitions, and people's perceptions of the world, or words, or concepts, or principles. So that's the concept of a deep dive here at Weirman Media, and it's never right, it's never wrong. It is simply our perspective. That is why I lead with that, and that's why I finish with that, because in between opening and closing, we get very passionate, and we talk about a very important topics, and I don't want anyone to ever think I'm right. I'm very passionate, and I believe in it, but at the end of the day, having a podcast has caused me to change and grow in many of my perspective, beliefs, and ideologies. So that's why I say it's not right, it's not wrong. Having this podcast taught me ego is right and wrong, and perspective is simply our individual reality and truth. And ego is the one, if I was egotistically to sit here and say that I'm right or you're wrong, or I'm wrong and you're right, that's ego, and that's not living through compassion, love, empathy, and kindness, which is about the more love movement and building unity and cooperation and collaboration. So, how are you doing this morning, Zaya?
Doing really good. I think talking about this topic of learning and applying knowledge and always remain the student is really good. My favorite quote, I don't know where I heard this. It was it was called Zen Buddha, Zen Mind or something. It was a book on Zen Buddhism that my dad gave me. And it was about open body, open mind. And one of the quotes it said is, always remain the student or the teacher, but never the principal. So when practicing those roles as the student and teacher, which you can be, ego can come into those, but when practicing those without ego, student and teacher is always about honesty and open-mindedness and learning. Even as a teacher.
Good morning, folks.
Even as a teacher,
Thanks for being with us.
The greatest teachers don't have ego. The greatest students don't have ego. So for me, that's one of my favorite quotes. Weird. That's one of my.
Check it out. Go back. I got you.
One of my favorite quotes. So what do you think about that one, Rambo?
That's a very great quote. Ultimately, I think essentially what you're talking about is everything that we do in life should embody growth and open-mindedness and essentially learning and the humility. That's why we talked about yesterday, replacing ego with humility and replacing ego with confidence, and that's the opposite. Whereas if I'm humble, I'm always willing and open to people's ideas, perceptions, and inputs to then improve and learn from them, and improve and learn moving forward how I can optimize and grow. We're good to go. You're good to go. So lead into what you were saying again, though. What was that book?
I don't remember the name of the book, but I
think learning comes back to testing, measuring, and developing. And if you look at it, no matter how wise or experienced you ever become, you ultimately have to always remain humble in understanding that the more you learn, the less you know. That's what I've realized after working with a master sculptor, Kim Duffett, having a brilliant father. My dad's incredibly intelligent. He's very intelligent. But one of the things I've noticed with some people in my life, and I will speak to my father slightly, is I'll say it, one of the smartest people I've ever met. But he's very closed to, he has a very hard time listening to other people's perspectives and opinions, because a lot of times I feel like he's so intelligent, and he's so rational with a lot of the things he talks about, that he's not open to very much of changing his beliefs. So
I would think it's more about analysis of paralysis too.
But I think a lot about learning is not being married to your beliefs, your ideas, and your principles. And a lot of people are married to their ego and what they believe in and what they know and what they've learned, and they don't realize that there's more to learn. And I think a big part of what we're talking about is going to be about being married to your ideas, beliefs, and perceptions.
And I would say that's a huge point. I got I think, a bigger point. All of that is irrelevant because even if you're married to your perceptions or you're not, it's irrelevant if you're not actually applying those things, which means you're kind of a hypocrite. So a lot of people, like even my dad, like my brother suggests, it's paralysis of analysis, where they sit here and they have their beliefs, whether they're married to them or not, they're not actually taking action in those beliefs. Like, I can read all these books. Like, my brother's not a big reader. I like to read. But what I've learned, the value of it all, is if I'm not applying anything in my life and taking action, it's really irrelevant. I have to apply this stuff. So you can get people that say they're Christians, or they say they're this, or they have these political beliefs, and they go online and they say all this shit. But I'm a hypocrite if I give all my opinion in this stuff, but I'm not actually living it.
Good morning.
And if I'm not
Good morning, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning. And if I'm not actually open-minded to auditing myself, to be like, yo, bro, you're talking about shit that you don't even live. So, like, for example, politics. I'm interested in them, but I don't talk a lot about them because I'm not, like, super active in politics and being active in that community or doing things, really, to actively make that community better. So I'm not going to sit here and go on here and talk about that and be stuck and act like I'm a know-it-all in politics. Like, I have to take action in the knowledge and experience, combining that to really be living authentically.
The other thing,
ego-free.
And that's the big thing about what we do at We're in Media, folks. I want you to realize that we have all these episodes we talk about, and the whole point of it is to go deep. It's the concept of fictional stories. When you share a fictional story, it causes you to live in ambiguity. It causes you to start to think about the principles and the concepts and the story that's being told and go deeper than the story, and hopefully maybe change your perceptions of those people or those characters or those ideas or those principles. And on our show, that's exactly what we do. We have dialogue via topics and conversations that are auditing perceptions and ideas and views of certain principles or topics or so forth, and we're diving into those, and we're auditing them, and we're having conversation and dialogue, which a podcast forces. My brother can share his perspective. The Recovery Atheist, shout out to the Recovery Atheist, shout out to Bob Monahan, shout out to Derek Smith, shout out to Mike P. Shout out to all the people that have been on the show, and we can share all of our perspectives of these ideas, and we can audit them. And then moving forward via ambiguity and understanding, all of us have different inexact views and interpretations of these topics, we can move forward and optimize our beliefs and grow and learn from each other. That's exactly everything that we do here at We're in Media.
Yeah, so I think those are the two key points my brother said about being open-minded to others and not being stuck to your ideas. And then two, whatever it is you do learn through the experience of sharing experience with others and connecting via storytelling, that we are applying that to our lives and open to changing throughout that process. As I apply something in my art, like as I'm applying something, I can't be married to that knowledge that I just learned from reading a book. It's the most effective or best way or even right. But I have to apply it. Trial and error. It's basically trial and error. That's what testing and measuring is. Trial and error, which removes ego. But I think a lot of people, and we've talked about this before, that requires not judging yourself, because when you do trial and error, it looks messy. Like if we're to show you all the trial and errors that we make in life or in business, like it's not pretty. But the reality is that's how we learn. So it has to be ego to be removed of that. And then I'll carry this into a new point that my brother was going to touch on, and that he can touch on this. That's how we learn. That process of learning is how we condition and we fitness and condition ourselves to then be better machines, to be better people. That is one point that
more sustainable species.
I do believe Ty Lopez, he's on social media a lot too, and I do follow Ty Lopez, and one of the things he says more than anyone, he makes it very blunt. He goes, the number one skill you need to be is a learning machine. That's what will separate you. Anyone, he says, the number one thing is be a learning machine. That's it. And I think that's what we're talking about here. But how do we do that? Like, that's a very large statement that he's saying, but we're trying to deep dive into being a learning machine. How do we become learning machines? That's the conditioning and fitness that my brother's talking about. So why don't you talk about what that means a little bit when you say conditioning and fitness and when it comes to learning?
So I'm going to lean into this. This is a big topic. So learning, I agree with everything you just said, and that's why these people talk about this. That's why we developed the system we have. It's testing, measuring, and developing, which equates to learning, which equates to absorbing stimuli or absorbing some kind of insight or perspective, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, via an experience or a trial and error. So if you look at ego, I'm going to do it as best I can quickly. Ego is about being perfect and not be you can't be imperfect. Ego thinks you have to be perfect and you can't be imperfect. I have to be precise and I have to be perfect, which equates to fear and insecurities. Ambiguity, which is why I talk so much about it, it's such a big deal, because ambiguity, me and my brother created a clothing line, and I learned this firsthand, that through creative expression and imagination, it's different interpretations and inexactness that ambiguity is. So once you realize the opposite of ego's ambiguity, you then have to start to understand creating a bunch of bad and average outputs is ambiguity. If you consistently create a lot of outputs that are average and bad, but you're open and humble enough to that, to then one day you're going to create great outputs. That is all required, though, and dependent on how much awareness you're having and how much you're testing, measuring, and developing via the empirical principles of inspecting what you're doing and how you're doing it, auditing the variables to it, and then gaining awareness and perspective moving forward, how you can adapt and optimize that and be as transparent and authentic and vulnerable as possible, replacing ego with humility. To me, that is exactly the key to growth.
And I think to simplify everything he just said is just recognizing that's the process. Like, accepting the fact that I'm not going to be good right away. Like, if you look at anyone that's great and polished,
which is humility.
You just have to accept the fact that I'm going to suck for a while. Everyone wants to be a master of the craft and get those beautiful things, but you don't get there until you've sucked a little bit. Now, some people
they start off a little higher
because
maybe.
they have more physical gifts. Maybe like they can jump high and they're physically gifted.
Or
like
they had a better quality parenting.
Or they have. I think a lot of it's but I think a lot of it when it comes to specifically learning a skill, it's just like some people have a little bit of natural talent. I'm not a big believer in talent because I believe work ethic and skill can be developed. But at the end of the day, talent is real, and some people are more intelligent or better looking or have physical gifts than other people that really helps you have a higher starting point. But that's not
Renee Kath. Thanks. I went to grade school with you, Renee. Thanks. That's John Kath's younger sister, Zaya. You know John Kath. He was in your grade. Thanks, Renee, for being with us.
But even those people suck to some extent because there's people better than them. So it comes down to not comparing yourself to someone else where you're at and not judging, and just do that. And that's why I think, again, this is key. Because you won't do this if you don't love what you're doing and you love the process. This is exactly what I've realized in my life that Gary Vee touched on. It's like, you will do this because if you love what you do, you'll love that process, so it doesn't matter. Like, when I love what I'm doing, I'm not thinking about all those egotistical things because I'm loving the process. Even if I'm sucking at it, I'm still loving the process because I'm doing something I enjoy. Like, that's what it is. But if you don't love what you do, you're never going to do that. That's my opinion. Like, if you don't love what you do and you don't love the process, you're never going to go through all those ups and downs.
Yeah,
in that process of learning how to get to being a good basketball player or to be a good entrepreneur or a good rapper or a good writer or a good exercise coach or whatever it is you want to do, if you're just doing it for money or because people think you should do it or whatever society's telling you, you're never going to get to that process because there is some shitty ups and downs. But if you love what you're doing, that won't matter.
So that's a great point, Zaya, is loving the process. And that's what episode we just did yesterday, folks. And I'm going to lean into that and explain again why love is so resilient. It's determined and it's committed. If you truly love something, you will be 100% committed. You will be 100% determined to be involved with that or a part of that. You will have 100% fortitude through the events, the highs and lows of that relationship or of that journey, and you will be 100% resilient for that person or that goal and objective. That correlates directly back with the episode we just had on love. If you didn't see it, please check it out on our podcast. And I agree, loving the process is a huge part of this. But the other thing is, I'm addicted to evolving. I'm addicted to growth. After I realized what life is, and it's such a small scope of time in the reality of the universe, I realized I at some point want to keep pushing myself to the brim of breaking down, but growing, evolving. I am addicted to evolving, and that's why I've leaned into all of these empirical, evolutionary, scientific, challenging principles and done a lot of the things I've done is because I want to try. What do you have to lose? You have to try. Dana White said this when he started his UFC company. He's like, what do you have to lose? He walked off his day job as a doorbellman. He was a doorbellman at some hotel, and he said, I have nothing to lose. If I go and I try and I try and I try and I fail, I can come back to this job any day I want. All you can do is you have to try. If you never try, you're going to look back at your life and say, you never really tried. So I'm addicted to evolving, and I equate addicted to evolving with learning. Because
if we don't
evolving is adaptation. Adaptation is growth and optimization.
Yeah, the average person never reads a book again after they graduate high school or college. Never.
I've never read a full book in my life. Not one, folks.
So I thought you said you read The Art of Happiness.
Yes, I read the keynotes. I read the keynotes and I listen to audiobooks.
Same concept, though.
I've never read a book in my life.
Okay, but that's not what I'm trying to. That's a different issue. What I'm saying is the point of what I'm saying. Whether you read the book, whether it's an audiobook, whether it's an ebook, or whether you get the keynotes, it's irrelevant. That's all the same thing. You're trying to learn.
It's actually a really big principle if you lean into that concept. Why people read books and why someone would read the keynotes. The difference.
But I'm not trying to talk about that micro issue. What I'm trying to talk about is the average person after high school or college stops learning. How you choose to learn, I'm not trying to get in that discussion. The point I'm trying to make is after high school or college, the average individual stops learning. They don't seek, they learn in high school or because they get a degree now. They were only doing it for that end result, not because of the process of trying to grow and remain a student. That's their mindset. That's what it says. No one after college, very few people keep wanting to learn and grow. So I guess the love of learning is what this rooted into. If you don't love learning and you don't love growing your mind, then you're not going to do that process. So getting that back, like my brother says, loving the process, like if you don't love learning, sometimes you can't teach someone that. But I believe learning is what brings me happiness. Every time I pick up a book or I listen to a podcast or I go on an audio book or whatever, YouTube, because we can learn through YouTube now and listen to audio tapes and all that stuff. Like whenever I learn something from someone else's perspective, from a book or a podcast or a YouTube or a talk, like I grow. It brings me, I have an aha light go on and it gives me a different perspective that allows me then to apply that to my life. If I don't apply that to my life, guess what happens? I have an aha moment and I forget it and my behavior doesn't change. So it's really not powerful. So it's really important for me to do that and then apply that at the same time. But I do love learning. And I think for me, taking the time to slow down and just like do learning like at the same time while applying it, that combination is what gets me the best result. I can't do one or the other. I need to do both. I need to be taking action all the time while being open to learning to other things and other processes and applying it. I can't not do anything and just read all the time and not apply it, then nothing happens either way. So for what I've learned is taking action while spending a small percentage of time, 5, 10, 15, even up to 20% of learning. But I think it should be 80 to 90% action and anywhere from 5, 10 to 20% where you're taking a step back to audit and then learn and listen to other people. But it definitely, in my opinion, should be about 80 to 90% action. Maybe 95 for your opinion. I don't know. But you know what I mean? Somewhere in that range where it's heavy action with a small percentage of taking a step back to learn and listen. So that's what I would suggest. What do you think? What do you think about that, Rambo? Yeah.
I think that ultimately we need to look at how we derive your knowledge and where you're deriving your knowledge from. And if you look at the two bases of knowledge and growth, it's empiricism and it's logic. So either you're learning through experiences and qualitative and quantitative absorption of data, or you're learning through logic. And when you look at the science of this, Albert Einstein is one of the smartest people in the world of all time. And he is one of the only people ever in the history of the world who had been able. Albert Einstein, if you research him, he would sit simply in his own mind and he would run experiments in his own mind without having any of the objects present. He would have scientific trials of error in his mind. He had the logical learning process where he would comprehend things and imagine them and challenge them and control and think about variables and think about different X factor, Y, Z. He is one of the only people in the history of the world that could learn from pondering and logic, just sitting in his own mind and thinking. It has been proven through the history that 99% of us as humans learn from doing and experiencing. People think, oh, you can, so the majority of the time, it's just the facts of science that our knowledge is derived from experiences. So that requires us to absorb qualitative and quantitative data from other people, from other individuals, from environments, from different arenas, from different states, from different countries, from different jobs, from different it's so crucial to be open and ego-free and humble to do things and taste and fail and say you just don't like this, but then find out you love this, because that's how you learn. And ultimately, I think a big topic that we could talk about is where you're deriving your knowledge from and why. Why are you deriving your knowledge from those sources and where? Because I think you should be deriving your knowledge from the ones that are bringing value forward at scale more than anyone else.
Not really that. I think it should be anyone that's actually living what they're saying is more than anything. And then what you're saying is number two.
The people that are bringing you the most.
Because someone could do that could still be a fake.
But whoever's giving you the most freely, whoever is giving you the most intellectual value freely at scale, whoever's consistently bringing you value without any kind of precondition. That
if they're living that value, though, because someone could do that and be a fake.
Totally, but if
there's some preachers
but if you look at the majority of the people that are bringing value, intellectual value freely at scale,
they're being real.
They're the majority of them.
If they're being real, like you're talking about, authentic and vulnerable, that's the key.
Exactly.
With that, because I feel like there are people that do that, but you can tell there's ulterior motives.
But
they're trying to sell you something on the back end, or they're trying.
That's why I'm going to mention Gary Vaynerchuk to everyone, because I think there's so many fakes out there that I recommend you tune into Gary Vaynerchuk. Gary Vaynerchuk, VaynerMedia, Vayner 4D Business Deep Dive. It's a $12,000 seat. It's a $12,000 business deep dive ticket, and it's given freely on YouTube. If you want to grow, if you want to learn from the best in the world, Gary Vaynerchuk is giving it away freely at scale. A $12,000 business consulting meeting is free. So that's what I think about. I'm not saying you have to, but for me, it's brought me a lot of value and insight, and that's where I derive a lot of my knowledge from, as well as having other people on this show. But my brother's probably the next person, and as well as other people that come on the show. But I'm constantly reading books like The Innovator's Dilemma that was written by Harvard, and The Founder's Mentality, Yuval Harari, Ego is the Enemy. I'm constantly reading the keynotes of books and studying and challenging myself.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm a big believer in biographies. I think that's the best way to get into someone's mind is there's a lot of powerful stories that you can listen to with people that share their stories. Like he talks about being authentic, vulnerable, storytelling. Like some of the most powerful things that I found that are people sharing their stories in biographies. And that's what we're doing in the modern world today with podcasting and social media is telling your story via at scale with that. So I think when you can get people that do that, like Gary Vee, it's super powerful. But really the key that separates Gary Vee is the micro aspect of being vulnerable and authentic. Because he could be doing all this, but if he wasn't being vulnerable and authentic, it wouldn't be the same thing. The key is he's doing it at scale, bringing value, but it's him doing it very authentically and vulnerable. He doesn't have a guard up. That's like a business person that's just trying to sell you on business. Like he's really talking about his story and what he believes in as a human. He's bringing humanism into it. That's really the key that separates him, because there's a lot of guys that do similar stuff with at scale on social media, but they're fake gurus. You can tell that they're not really being authentic and vulnerable and bringing the humanistic way where they're really just trying to share their true story and trying to help people grow and connect. So I think
like this one guy, Jason Capital, he has a program that people pay him thousands of dollars a month to try and get them laid. It's a program for how to get women. Sorry to say, that is a complete joke.
Yeah, so people will try to sell you on anything. I mean,
selling you on how to get women? Come on, folks.
Well, people pay for prostitution, so what's the difference? But yeah, so that example of like you can use social media in negative ways. You can use your power and skill in negative ways. That guy might not think it's negative, but like that's not practicing the use of storytelling and being vulnerable and authentic. So I think for me, that's who we should listen to. That's who we should look for. So when I'm trying to look for something to get knowledge and experience from, I'm looking for anybody that's being vulnerable and authentic in sharing their story. That is all I look for. That's it. Now the key to Gary Vee is he understood that, and he's using it at scale, meaning when we say at scale, it's not him just writing a book that it's not just him telling one person in the back of a room. It's him using social media, which allows us then to do that to millions of people at once, like a podcast like we're doing here. That's a lot more impactful than just having one person that you talk to. That's easier to get access to than someone who has to buy a book and then purchase that to read it. Not that any of those things are wrong, because I do believe we should still write books and give those, I think, in books or audio books, and give those people. I still think we should help people on an individual, in-person level, like my brother says, one-to-one, because if you're not there in their life, you're not as invested. So I do think it's a combination of all those things, but what we're sharing here is with doing it like a podcast is now you're able to do that at a larger scale and grow and connect to more people when we never could have done that 20 or 30 years ago. So that's where the teacher comes into play, right? So Gary Vee, we talked a lot about the student. Now we're pivoting to the teacher. That's what a successful teacher does. A successful teacher is a student, and it begins to master their craft till they got to this point where they've mastered it. Now they're giving that knowledge away authentically, vulnerably, to students to help them grow. That's their only motive, is to teach, not to sell them, not to use them. Like a teacher is there to just help you grow and get to where they are. And not only that, they're not coming off as a principal, because once you're a teacher and your ego gets in the way, now you're acting like the principal of the school who's controlling everyone and telling them what they can and can't do. So that's kind of how I would bring this back to the big picture now and pivot into being a teacher, like you just said, and then remind yourself to not let your ego get into your way when you get that success and become the principal. Because when you become the principal, when I become the principal, I'm an ego, and I'm not really being a teacher anymore.
So I'm going to lean into this, and we're going to talk about now, I think what is a great point is your story, and authentic and vulnerable in your story. And for me, almost all of my insight and experience comes directly from all of my story. And I'm going to lean into it because we haven't done a ton of leaning into this. And for me, a lot of my knowledge and my learned experiences have come directly from my story. And I love being vulnerable and authentic. Shout out to the Recovery Atheist on his last episode. He talked about how he's come so far in such a short period of time, in less than 6 months. Now he was sitting in a professional studio where he has his own podcast, his own merch, and less than 6 months ago, he was virtually homeless and completely self-absorbed. So for me, I also was there at some point. I had brain surgery to start my life, which taught me a lot about appreciation for life, and then I had started having drug addiction out of that brain surgery, and I started taking care of my mom, and losing my mom at a young age taught me a lot. Right out the gate, before I was 19, I had already had brain surgery, had already started using heavy prescription narcotics, and my mom had already died. So those are 3 of the most valuable experiences I've ever had in my life, and I had them all before I was even 19. So I think it's really amazing when you can realize how valuable the most painful, difficult failures and sufferings are, which actually give you the most value and build you up the most. Because if you can handle those and sustain through them and learn and optimize and adapt, then you truly become a much more conditioned and fit species that has learned and is more capable of moving forward, helping others, and also bringing value to others and bringing value forward to the world. It's not, I've always said it before, everyone has value to bring forward. It doesn't matter how much you've been through or what you've been through. We all have value to bring forward. But for me, I'm just talking about my story, and I think a lot of it correlates to what you just said about storytelling and authenticity and learning through empiricism versus logic and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, it's an old quote that our mess can become our message, and that our value is less about being an expert and know-it-all and more about just your story and your experience, because that has the value. Then if you combine that with remaining a student and really kicking up the gear to learning and applying knowledge, then you become someone who combines value and experience with knowledge, and now you become someone who's really even more valuable. So that value can grow with that. But, I mean, when it comes to knowledge, again, it's about storytelling. So if you look at the best teachers, when you're trying to explain complex things, you can simplify it to a story. That's how I remember. Like when I was in high school and they're talking about history, right? I don't remember the stats of how many people died in World War One or two, but I remember the stories that my teacher talked about with the Jews at the Nazi camps and the horrificness of that and all that. And that's what
Thanks for being with us, Peter Maxwell.
Thanks, Peter. And that's what makes me remember.
Miss you, Peter. What's up, fella?
That's what makes me remember the power of what that learning experience gave me. So understanding that storytelling is the root of connection and the root of how we grow and remember things is key. But kind of going back, big picture here, and just to sum it all up, like, you know, Warren Buffett said, the more you learn, the more you earn. This isn't about money. But when it comes to life and wanting to be able to connect to people and find our passion and happiness and be able to sustain ourselves financially through doing that, that's it. The more you learn, the more you earn. Like Warren Buffett was reading 600 to 800 pages a day at one point. I don't think he reads that much anymore. But that means the majority of his day, now this is skim reading. When I say reading, it's about trying to find, like my brother says, the reason why he doesn't read, he does the keynotes, but that's exactly what Warren Buffett's doing. He's looking for the information he needs to quickly and directly apply in his active life as an investor in that day live. Like that was his intention of reading that much every day. He needed knowledge. He needed information. He needed to read all the papers in the news every day to see how the world was operating in order to make investments. So you apply that to our lives, we need to do the same thing. Right? Every day we need to be soaking up information, like Ty Lopez says, be a learning machine, and then apply that to our lives. But I will never do that if I'm not learning stuff and doing that I enjoy. I don't. This will never work. You can't force me. This is the beauty. Like, you can't force me. Like, I love to learn about anything, really. But you can't force me what really gets me off the most when I'm learning about something. Like, I can't force me. No one can force me to be more excited about like talking about more Love Nation and art and connectiveness and finding your passion than anything else. Like that's just who we are. That's how we find ourselves. Like my brother says, he's done a moving business. There's no way he's going to be able to be as happy doing the same thing every day when learning about moving. Like he's done it. He knows that's cool. It's a good business, but he knows it's not something that he gets him off and is passionate about is what this is. But you don't know that if you don't try different things and taste things to find out what the one thing that when you obsess over learning. I think you should just look at what you obsess over. Whatever you obsess over, that's what you should start to learn about and do. Because you obviously can't stop from thinking about it.
And it's going to require a massive amount of energy and output and work and discipline and love for what you do. And if you're obsessing about it, there's a direct correlation between obsessing and love. But Renee Kath, I want to say thanks for tuning in. She says, I'm quitting my job on the 8th to go travel the lower 48 states with someone who is dying of cancer soon. You need to choose to live and love and not waste your life. Thanks, Renee.
That's pretty well put right there. Shout out to Renee. That's very well put. That's it. That's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about. But you got to love what you're learning about. That's what makes it the process. Like, I can tell you right now, you could apply this to something, because I've learned and read about different things, and I eventually get bored of stuff. I just get bored. But if you love what you do, you'll never get bored of it, in my opinion. No. You won't. That's what you have to find.
That's what I was talking about
you
with
have
love
to find,
yesterday. If
you have
really
to find
love someone, you'll never get bored of them. Exactly. If I really love you, I'll never get bored of you.
Yeah, that's true. But there is balance too. Like I can do something too much.
Yeah, just because I say it doesn't mean you have to be around someone every second of the day. I'm just saying.
The same thing with
work. If I really love someone, I will never get bored of you.
Exactly. Same but that same goes to your business. Just because you love your business doesn't mean you need to do your business 24/7.
It's my escape.
But that's what I'm saying. So that same thing is, I believe also you don't need to work 100 hours a week and sleep 3 hours a night. And like, that's the only type of person that really loves what they do.
But if you know yourself really good and that's what makes you happy and that's what you enjoy, then that's what you should do.
Of course. But what I'm saying is you don't have to do that is all I'm trying to say. When we're applying this to entrepreneurship and business as well, what I'm saying is you should love what you do. Like, you can obsess over it. Everyone's obsessiveness is different. The key point that I'm trying to make is you should love what you do. But don't compare that to anyone else. If one person wants to work like Elon Musk 100 hours a week and that's what makes him happy, great. If you're someone that only wants to do something 50 hours a week and that's what makes you happy, great. The point we're trying to bring this back, if you love what you're doing and you're happy, that's fine. The other micro stuff is all relative. If you're doing 50 hours a week but you're complaining still, then guess what? You need to do 70. Because I think Grant Cardone says this. He was saying that if you're not working at least 60 to 80 hours a week and you're complaining, I have no sympathy for you. Now, if you're working 60 to 80 hours a week and you're complaining a little bit, and he says you're frustrated, he goes, guess what? I'm going to have more sympathy and want to sit down with you and help you because you're not, laziness isn't your issue. It's just your process or something. He said something like that and it made perfect sense. He goes, but if you're working less than that and you're happy, he goes, fine. But if you're coming to me and and I ask you how many hours you're working a week and it's not at least 60 to 80, he goes, I don't care. Your problem is you're not working enough. You're not putting enough effort. And that seems a little extreme, but Grant Cardone again says, "Oh, how do you balance that?" He goes, "You need to find your purpose again. When you get to those hours and you start getting, because you can get tiring when you get up there. But what he says, how he has maintained his passion throughout that whole time while putting in that work, is he always brings it back to his why and his purpose of what he's doing, and that's what keeps him motivated over the last 30, 40 years. Because I mean, Gary Vee is the best, like Josh says, but I do like Grant Cardone because the guy's in his 60s and he's killing it still. He's fucking ripped. He goes to the gym. He's still working 70, 80 hours a week. Like, you have to respect someone.
Yeah, he's just more of a salesman to me.
Yeah, he is, but you still have to look at, but you can't look holistically. I agree with you, but you still have to look at what he's doing, that what he represents, that is like he's doing what we're saying. He loves what he's doing, and he's in his 60s, and he's still growing and learning and helping people. So when you look at that, for an example, that's how I look at it. Like, if I'm not doing at least 60 hours a week on something, I have no right to complain, because if I'm not getting the results, it's because I'm lazy and not putting in enough work. Right? You're someone who works 60 hours plus a week every week. So wouldn't you say that if someone's working less than 60 hours a week and they're complaining, that the root problem of them is they're not putting in enough time and effort?
Yeah, there's a few things that cause me to audit people, and I think complaining is the number one thing that you would say you have to audit someone on.
But that specific thing, if someone's complaining and they're not even working 60 plus hours a week, wouldn't you say that's the first thing you would say? Like, how many hours a week are you working on your business? That's the first question he says he asks people. 40. And you're complaining.
I don't think there's any reason to complain.
But I know, but that's what happens though. But just like in that mindset, you get what I'm saying? Like, wouldn't you think that's the first thing? Like, if I'm talking to someone complaining, the first thing I want to ask them is, well, how many hours are you dedicating to this thing that you feel like...
that's what Gary Vee says. Gary says he hears someone complain, and the first thing he does is he audits the shit out of your time. But here, folks, learned behavior, I'm going to read this, is a behavior that occurs only after experience or practice. Learned behavior has an advantage over innate behavior due to the fact it is more flexible. This is huge. It is flexible. Everything in flexibility is a key concept. It's fluid. Flexibility is fluid. Learned behavior occurs only after experience or practice. This is what correlates with action and empirical principles of learning through experience and taking action and developing action through developing strategy through action, developing strategy through the action that you take, and not being egotistically fearful of being right or wrong or inexact or imprecise, and being comfortable with being imperfect and not the best, and being bad, average, or mediocre, and then consistently leaning into that, testing, measuring, and developing, and optimizing and adapting, and moving forward, learned in a more optimized way, and having the understanding that it is the far more flexible, open-minded, and humble, and path forward to learn. So ultimately, it all comes down to action. It all comes down to experience and practice. Repetition. Practice correlates with consistency and being diligent and being disciplined. The issue is a lot of us, we lack this because of our lack of quality parenting. A lot of our behaviors start at a young age. We talked about this before in the last episode about ego is the enemy. Is we have to meet ego at a young age and stop ego from instilling unhealthy practices and tendencies and behaviors in us, so that at a young age we can start to lean into more healthy learning behaviors or more healthy learning environments and learning actions and learning and whatever it takes to do that. So I think it's a big deal about at a young age is where I feel like a lot of this takes place in America, and a lot of it takes place within us, and we develop bad egotistical behaviors and unhealthy learning behaviors or unhealthy ways of exploring ourselves or exploring ideas, instead of healthy, constructive, ego-free, humble, open-minded, ambiguity way of living in life. So, but yeah, so learned behavior, I think, it's all about the repetitive practice and experience. That's what it says right here. Learned behavior occurs only after experience and practice.
So that goes back to habits. So we can learn habits. So the one thing I like what you talked about there is, and this is my experience. When it comes to learning a habit and learning knowledge and a new skill, it seems overwhelming at first, but anytime I'm doing something now, what I've realized from my experiences is there's just your first 30 to 60 days doing anything might seem a little overwhelming or stressful, but that's the process of learning. Once you can understand that it's only temporary, that no matter what you're doing, getting back in shape, eating healthy, learning a new skill, it's all about effort, and that it's going to eventually become something that doesn't take your willpower. So like there's a saying that when you're learning something new, right, you have so much energy and willpower and time in your brain and your body that it can take a lot of energy because it's something new. But once you learn something, after that 30 to 60 days, it requires less thinking and effort. It becomes natural. It's a habit that has been developed. It's trained. It's learned behavior. You don't have to think. Like I don't have to think about the way I think now with prayer and meditation and being of service. Like I've trained my mind to be that way. It was a lot of effort at first when I got sober. I was like, this is really hard. This is a new way to think and live. But once we learn behavior, it becomes effortless. And that's how we grow and we learn is we keep applying something, we download it, we adapt it, and then we apply. I said that backwards, but you know what I'm saying. We apply it, and we adapt, and then we apply, and then we move on. And Kobe Bryant is a great example of someone who said that's how he did his basketball career, is he would audit himself on his weaknesses, and he would then learn that, apply it, and then adapt. And that's how he became a better basketball player. So I think for me is just the recognition that, like, don't feel overwhelmed when you're trying to learn new things because it's uncomfortable, but recognizing that uncomfortability is a short period. If you can accept the fact that for 30 to 60 days, no matter what you're doing differently, you're going to be uncomfortable, but after 30 to 60 days, it's going to become a habit that's no longer uncomfortable for you. That's how I look at it with myself. That's how I can be open-minded to trying so many different things. Going on a podcast, learning about real estate, doing sober housing, music, film, fashion. Same with my brother. How is he able to adapt to do so many different things and apply? It's applying the same principle to anything you're about to do and realizing that it's just a short learning curve, that you're going to be a little uncomfortable and you're going to have some errors and it's going to be a little more time and energy. But once you get through that, it becomes quite effortless. There's not as much thinking. There's not as much energy being used because it's a developed habit that's a learned behavior that he's talking about. So for me, that's what I've learned. I've already accepted that whenever I do something new that I'm going to be uncomfortable for a little while, and I accept that, but then I know after about 30 to 60 days, it'll be like clockwork. It'll be a natural habit.
Totally. And this all comes back with the Weirman X model and the Scrum characteristics.
Focus, yeah, it's good.
And all that, and the 5 characteristics that we merge with empirical principles that we develop for all of our system and streamlined content creation. We are Weirman Media. We are a modern-day marketing research company. We are a business consulting company. We are a marketing and advertising company, and we are essentially merging all of these different services into a media and communication company to help you grow. And the value is phenomenal. But the main characteristics that we've merged to come up with this are the 5 main characteristics of scientific Scrum model, which is how you overcome complex operations and you make them simple. It is focus, it's courage, it's commitment, it's respect, and it's openness. And then you merge those with the 3 characteristics we touched on earlier of inspection, transparency, and adaptation, which those 3 empirical principles directly correlate with our growth steps. The first step is audit and awareness, which is the connection to inspection, which inspection brings you to awareness and perspective. Step 2 directly correlates with humility and open-mindedness, which is what you do to replace ego with, which correlates with transparency, because with transparency and authenticity and vulnerability, it leads to openness and humility. And then the final step is adaptation, which relates to the 3rd step of the Weirman growth steps, which is taking action, developing strategy through doing, and sharing intellectual value freely at scale, which leads to optimization and leads to adaptation and growth. And then via testing, measuring, and developing, this whole concept I just said, you can repeat, and you're constantly optimizing. You're auditing, you're optimizing, you're growing, and you're going. You're auditing, optimizing, growing, and you're going. Auditing, optimizing, growing, and going. And then you're gonna get so far ahead of your competition and everyone that you're gonna be miles ahead because they're still sitting in the back of the office reading a book, thinking about a couple words in their mission statement, and they're worried about, oh, we're playing defense and not offense. So you have to start being active and you can't be reactive. You have to start moving towards from being reactive to proactive to and being the one that's offensive and not defensive. So I think those characteristics are essential to those 5 I said of focus, commitment, courage, respect, and openness to be willing to learn.
Yeah, I agree.
That's exactly what we're talking about, because you have to be open to and focused and committed and courageous, and you have to be committed to learning.
But the main thing about all this is, I think, just to sum it up, this is the last thing I'll say, is it starts with removing the judgment from yourself and ego and that fear and just doing it. And you're going to have some bumps and bruises.
That's the hardest
just
part.
Accept that.
What you just said is the hardest part. And Gary Vee said it's his most important thing is he doesn't judge.
Exactly.
himself.
That's what I'm thinking. That's what I want to bring back to because...
Which is ego.
That is, and it's a combination of ego,
it is ego.
And fear and perfectionism.
Ego is fear and insecurity.
Yeah.
Perfectionism is ego.
Yeah, ego is fear is ego. It's the same thing.
Perfectionism is ego too. Because you have to be precise.
Yeah, it all is. It's all the same. But I'm just saying, how I'm giving those 3 examples because those are probably the biggest 3 viewpoints that someone might have. Even though it's the same thing.
Good morning, Auntie
those
Amy.
Those are the things that I feel like prevent people. And me, I'm guilty of that in my life. I'm 30, and if I inventory the last 10 years of my life, I've had moments of fear. I've had moments of ego. I've had moments of perfectionism. That has prevented me from being who I want to be and growing and changing. And what I've learned is, what I've also done, which I want to get better at, is not judging myself when I just do shit. And that's the key. That's what has allowed me to get where I am, where I've done a bunch of stuff. And my brother's done even lots of different stuff that I haven't done. But whatever level of that is, I just want you to try, wherever you're at, it doesn't matter. You don't need to be extreme and do as much.
Thanks, Auntie. She ordered one of our sweatshirts.
Thank you, Auntie. So, that's what I challenge, is to be able to not judge yourself, because the better I've gotten at that, I've actually been able to have fun through that process, because I look at that as just part of the game, and that's where the growth comes. So that allows me to have fun at the same time when I'm doing things that aren't necessarily perfect or giving me the best results right away or a perfect life that other people might think that I should live. That it just allows me to make decisions that's rooted in non-judgment and trying to find happiness. So that's the key for me. You won't do any of this stuff if you can't get out of that. If you're super judging yourself, it'll never happen. You'll be stuck in perfectionism and ego, and you'll never move forward. For me, that's the key.
For me, the key is listening. Number one, I think that's great. We'll wrap this up. I think number one is listening. Is looking at and auditing. Who am I? I found Gary Vee. I've always been blessed. I have along my life, like my brother said, done a lot of things, and I've stumbled into a world-class sculptor. I've stumbled into Tom Allis, who's a world-class human and businessman, and I stumbled into Gary Vaynerchuk.
Well, Nick Hansen is the one who introduced us to Gary Vee.
Yes, but I stumbled into Gary Vaynerchuk. Gary Vaynerchuk is where I derive the majority of my direction and my insight. I have my beliefs, but then I incorporate all his because he's doing it the best. He's doing it better than anyone at scale, and he's giving away more than anyone at scale. He has $12,000, let me say it again, $12,000 seats he charges for that he then records the meetings of with business owners that paid $12,000 to be in the meeting, and then he takes it and releases it free on YouTube. There's 7 of them that are over 2 hours long that are $12,000 seats, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to learn, you can go and learn today without paying a single fee and absorb all that knowledge and that insight from those conferences and meetings. It's the Gary Vee 4D Business Deep Dive. Google it on YouTube. You'll see it. You'll learn more than you've ever learned in anything you've ever listened to before. It's the smartest, most successful businessman currently, one of top 5 or 10 in the world. So that's where I derive a lot of my knowledge from, and that for me is a big thing, is where I'm deriving my knowledge from and why, and auditing why I'm taking it from that person. And for me, a big part of it is listening. A lot of us were never listening. We're egotistically never truly listening. and we're not comprehensively challenging our ideas and beliefs. Like most of the people at the hostel, shout out to the hostel due Nord, I can sit and talk to them and talk. And they literally do not listen. They say yeah, but they're not comprehensively like contemplating it. Like when someone tells me something, like my brother or the recovery atheist, I sit there and I analyze it. And I audit my beliefs and I audit what they just said. And I think, does that make sense? Does what I'm saying make sense? Do they work together? Am I wrong? Am I right? And I'm neutrally assessing that. I'm not sitting there just saying, oh, I'm right. Yeah. I'm right. What you're saying is just your opinion and what you think's right. I'm neutrally auditing the perspectives and the information brought forward. And I feel like the majority of people actually scientifically, if you look into it, due to the fact we're addicted to friction-free living. And if you look at the majority of the people that tune into our show, they tune in for less than 3 to 4 minutes. We are moving so fast as consumers, and we're operating so fast, and we have very little time to listen. So I think it's a big deal. I think it's a big topic we can lean into in the future, is understanding the importance of listening. We talked about it briefly before, right, Zaya? Understanding wants, needs, and desires of others. But I think listening is a big part for me of learning.
That's open-mindedness.
Totally.
That's the principle. Open-mindedness is the principle of learning.
That's right, Amy. $12,000 seats for free. There is no one else in the world, no one, giving away a $12,000 business conference seat. And that's right, Amy. His name is Gary Vaynerchuk. Gary, V-A-Y-N-E-R-C-H-U-K. It's called Gary V 4D Business Deep Dive, Amy. It's on YouTube. It's free. There's no other business owner in the world that's giving away a $12,000 business seat. Not a single one. So I would recommend that to everyone. It's one of the most valuable things I've ever listened to. But at the end of the day, I think we're going to wrap it up, Zaya. What do you got to say? We got 4 people on my end. We got 1 on your end. Let's wrap it up, eh?
Yeah, I got nothing else to add. Like I said before, I think open-mindedness and the ability to not judge yourself is the key to learning. Don't let ego and perfectionism prevent you from growing and learning. Always remain the student and the teacher, never the principal. I have to check myself and inventory and audit to make sure I'm not the principal. And as long as I'm not the principal, I think I'm doing pretty good. So try to remain the student or the teacher and never the principal. So thank you guys for tuning in and have a great day.
Remember, it's not right, it's not wrong. It is simply our perspective.